So welcome, Carmen. And I'm looking forward about Teams and the user interface, how you will build it. So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining my session and welcome from my side as well to the Global Power Platform Bootcamp 2022 Belgium edition. I love that the Belgian Power Addicts logo contains French fries. Well, actually, Belgian fries, because it's one of my favorite things to eat. Let's get started. So, of course, please be respectful to everyone attending the meeting. We are all people and we are all here to learn. If you have any questions, you can ask them through the chat. And you can also use meeting reactions to let me know. I do have Teams open on the other screen. It's always good to see some feedback, even if it's not in real life. And a big thank you to the sponsors of today. Without them, it would not be possible to host this event. And of course, thank you to the organizers, Fredrik, Clifton, and other people on the team for organizing and hosting today. I will be talking about how you can build beautiful Teams apps using the Teams UI Toolkit and as a maker. So specifically, I'm going to show you how you can apply the Teams UI Toolkit to a Canvas app. I'm a Power Platform architect at Cubix, based in Belgium. I'm also, since the beginning of the year, awarded as a Business Applications MVP. I do consider myself a low-code developer. There are different terms for that, but I consider myself a low-code developer. I love to learn new things, and I have a small dog whom I love very much. You can occasionally find me on Twitter at Carmen Ysewijn, and I do blog on digipersonal.com. So let's talk about why I am doing this session, why I believe this topic is an important one to talk about. First of all, when you see the applications that are built for Microsoft Teams, they look like this. This is an example of the Resource Center, which I believe is an app provided by Microsoft. And you can see that the application just fits inside Microsoft Teams. It has the same look and feel, it uses the same colors, same font, icons, everything looks very familiar. It's clear that this was an app built for Microsoft Teams. Another example is the Viva Insights app, which is also very fitting into the entire theme of Teams with the cards and everything. If we then look at a typical Power App, this is what they look like. If you are a maker or a low-code developer and you have built Canvas apps, then this will look familiar to you. When you see these kinds of applications, you can guarantee that it's a Canvas app. They look alike. They are not very attractive, not very intuitive often. Even if we go to a tablet layout, we can see that this is a form control in a Canvas app. It's very typical. But if you put this into Teams, it just doesn't look like it belongs there. It doesn't really look good. And why should we care about whether or not our application looks like it belongs in Teams? Because I just care about functionality. I don't care that much about UI, but why should I care about that as a maker or as a low-code developer? I see three reasons for that. First of all, if your app is beautiful, is intuitive, and it fits into whatever tool or platform that you are hosting it in, or that you are making it available to your users in, is it will increase adoption if it looks in place. Because when something is beautiful, we are more likely to use it. When something is intuitive, we are more likely to use it. If I don't need to think about how an application works, I will just want to use it. I won't care about why I would have to use this. I will want to use it because it's easy to use. It will also increase security, and this is not as straightforward as maybe increasing adoption. But that is because as part of security efforts, we are constantly telling our users, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. If it feels wrong, it probably is wrong. So stay away, steer clear. Don't click on that link in that email that doesn't come from the normal email address. Don't respond to an email with a lot of typos if it's not someone you know, if the name is written in the wrong way or whatever. Don't respond to it. Don't engage. But then on the other hand, if we were to make apps available to our users that in Microsoft Teams that don't look like they belong in Teams, why would the user, or if that feels wrong, then we want to be able to have that same message to the user. If it feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And therefore we should invest in making it feel right, in making it look like it belongs where you are making it available. And in that way, native looking applications will help increase security as well, because you can have that same message that you spread all the time when it comes to security. If it feels wrong, it probably is wrong. So make it feel right so that it also is right, because it is right. And thirdly, it will make your colleagues happy or your users happy, because when something is beautiful, we as human beings, we tend to like beautiful, pretty, shiny new things. So if you make it native looking, if you make it easy, if you make it intuitive, the users, your colleagues, they will be happy to use it. And these 3 reasons is why I think native looking apps are important. And I found this quote online: UI design is successful when people want to use it, when people want to use your UI. And I think this beautifully sums up what I have, with the 3 reasons that I see as well. So how do we get there, actually? Because it's not that easy. I can say, yes, you should do it, but it's not that easy to actually do it. So how do we get from A to B? How do we get from a typical Power App to something that looks like it belongs in Microsoft Teams? And that is what I'm going to try to give you a feel of today, how you can do that. And I'm going to start by introducing the Teams UI Toolkit and talking about how that can help you. And then we will apply some of the concepts in that on a Canvas app that I have prepared. And then to finish off, I will share some resources to help you get started. So let's first take a look at the Microsoft Teams UI Toolkit. And for this, I'm going to go to a browser. So if you search online, if you Google or Microsoft or use Bing to Google Teams or to search for Teams UI Toolkit, then one of the first links that will pop up is this docs.microsoft.com page that talks about how you can use UI templates and the Microsoft Teams UI Kit to build your, to design your Microsoft Teams apps faster. Then this first link, Get the UI Kit Figma, will take you to this page. Figma is a design tool, and Microsoft has made available the guidelines for Microsoft Teams design that they use themselves online through this Microsoft Teams UI Kit. If we then select duplicate, then we actually get our own copy of the toolkit to browse through so that you can see what each and every component does and what it should look like, what is the right colors, what is the font, the size, all of those things you can get from the Microsoft Teams UI Toolkit. So you can go really into detail in this toolkit. Now, to find your way, in the left, we have the navigation. In the middle, we have all of the components that we can select. You see that when I hover over it, the thing that I'm hovering over has like the blue border because it's in focus, and then I can select it. And then on the right-hand side, the details pane that will show me all of the properties of whatever it is that I have selected. So right now it shows me all of the properties of this header or this title and this logo. On the left, if we navigate through, there are 5 sections in the toolkit, and I'm going to start by explaining what each of them contains, what information you can get in them. The first one is the general information section. This explains how you can use the UI toolkit, how it works, etc. The second one is the design system. So the design system section contains general information about Microsoft Teams design. So really high level. If you're starting from scratch, if you didn't have all of these things, but you still wanted your app to resemble Teams without going into the nitty-gritty details, you could use the design system to get started. So it contains information about the general layout of your components compared to each other. What should be the distance? The fact that these applications work on a grid of 4 pixels. So everything that you do should be a multiple of 4 pictures. What should avatars look like? Which icons should you use and where can you find them? Because we should use Fluent icons, so Fluent UI icons, and you can find the library in GitHub. So you can easily go there and then get the icons that you want to. Which fonts are used and what is the spacing, etc. Which colors are used? What exactly is that color for Teams Blurple, which I like to call it because it's somewhere in between blue and purple, of course. So what is that color code? And also the secondary colors. If I'm looking for something red, what should that be? Or if I'm looking for a green check mark, which green should that be exactly? So you can find all of that information here. Shape and elevation. What is the border radius of Teams buttons? Because you can go very straight and very rounded. What is a Teams button? What should that be? And then copy and content. What should be the way in which you talk, in which you, well, not talk because it's written, but the way in which you write your text? What should the, for example, be inclusive? So not chairmen, but chair, not man or mankind, but humanity, people, humankind, all of those things. Pick simple over technical terms, all of those things. This is all of the general information that will be applied throughout the rest of the toolkit. So start here, and then the next thing is app capabilities, which means where will your app sit in Microsoft Teams? Because we can have personal apps, but we can also have tabs in a team. We can have messaging, meeting extensions, bots. Depending on the capability that you have, what is the available canvas that you can use? For a personal app, it will be different than for a bot, for example, because a personal app is just in the left rail, and then you have everything on the rest of the screen basically to work with. Whereas if you have a bot, well, it will be in a chat, or it will be messages that you are exchanging. So that will look a little bit different. For Canvas apps, it will mostly be personal apps and tabs for now. Then the next thing that I'm going to skip the UI components for now, and I'm going to first go into the UI templates. So when we know the general design system, we know the colors, and maybe we have put them in the on start of our application. We know which capability we are using, a personal tab or a personal app or a tab in a team. Then the next thing to do is designing our screens, the different screens that we have. And for this, the UI templates are very interesting to start with because they will give you a general overview of what typical UI groups will look like, or what typical screens will look like. You might have a list somewhere in your app. Then this is in general what the list should look like. It should be very simple, not too much detail, or not too much extravagant graphics or something. Of course, the Fluent UI icons. There should be a line in between list items, but it's very subtle gray. So if you are looking for a list, start with the UI template for a list, and then you can build that. And then for the specific ones, you use the UI components. So there are several UI templates here, a list, a sign-in, which is very useful when you are building a sort of welcome screen, because that's typically what a sign-in screen will be, even if you don't have to sign in. A welcome screen is something where you say welcome, and then you have different options that the user can choose from. If you are doing something like a task board or a planning board, what should that look like? All of those things you can find in the UI templates. And then for the specific ones, let's say, for example, oh, okay, so I have a menu here and I have some buttons, or I have cards. What should they look like? And for that, we go to the UI components. So there are some that are specific for Microsoft Teams, or that occur very often in Microsoft Teams. And then we have the basic UI components, things like buttons, cards, a carousel, a checkbox. If I'm building a checkbox, or if I'm creating a checkbox for Microsoft Teams, what should that look like? What should it look like depending also on the different states, whether it's selected or unselected, when it's selected and in focus, when it's disabled, all of that information. And then of course also in dark mode, because Teams has it has 3 themes actually. It has default or standard, and then dark mode, and then high contrast, which is not included in the UI toolkit, but the colors are described in the design system. So all of those nitty-gritty details. And then how can I actually look into what that looks like if I zoom in, and if you click, you do have to click a couple of times, but then you have selected, for example, this button specifically, and then here in the right detail pane, I can see, okay, so the fill is this color code, and the text is this, it's completely white, which I can also see, but now I know that it's actually completely white. The border radius is 4, and the spacing between items is 4. And for the colors, what I find very useful if I don't know what exactly is the color, if I'm looking at the right color, because sometimes there are, for example, for this one, it will have probably a fill and a text. They are both gray, so to know which one it is, if it's not that clear, what I do is I usually put it in a different color, and then I undo that so that I know that exactly that is the element that I am looking at the color at. So that is something that I use to identify which element exactly, if I'm taking the color of the right element, for example. So this is the Teams UI Toolkit. Now, it's a bit tricky to get started. It takes some time. That's why I already went through it, so that you have an idea already when you are using it. Now let's take a look at an application that I want to look at today. So I have created an attendances registration application, because we still need to register that we are going to the office, for example. So I have created an application. I have used one of the default themes in Canvas apps that are purple, but it's not the same. It's not the same color as the Teams Blurple, of course. I also have my picture here, but I also already have it here. So when I'm already signed into Teams, it doesn't really make sense that my picture is on the home page, and even in the header here, my picture is here again, but it's also here in the top right corner. So that doesn't really belong in a Teams application. That's not something that I'm used to. When I have another personal app in Teams, my picture isn't there because I already know that I'm logged into Teams. You can see that the form doesn't look like Microsoft Teams form. The same for the list. If you look at all attendances, it just looks like a typical gallery in a Canvas app. It doesn't look like it belongs in Microsoft Teams. So what I want to do now is I want to make this so that it matches the Teams UI better. And for that, I'm going to the studio. You can see that this is the same application that I had in the that I had open in Teams. So let's take a look at how we can change this. First of all, I'm going to remove my picture and that welcome message, because it doesn't make sense when I'm in Microsoft Teams. I don't need that anymore. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the UI template that will best match whatever it is that I'm trying to design here. And in this case, of course, I'm designing a welcome screen. So if I go back to the Teams UI Toolkit and I go to the UI templates, as I mentioned, the sign-in screen is one that typically works very well. Or that is a typical example of something that you can use when you are designing a welcome screen for your app. And so it looks different depending on the capability of your application. And then the third panel, or the third column, describes the anatomy of the welcome screen in this case, so the framework. And so I can see that typically I have we have an image, then we might have some welcome text if relevant, and then underneath that we have some buttons. And I also have an image, which I already created using the correct color codes, and I have 3 buttons. So how should they be placed on the screen? I can see that to the left, the image is a maximum of 420 pixels wide and 200 pixels high. So that's what I'm going to change my, image size to. And then for the buttons, they are just normal buttons. They will be buttons underneath. They're not sign-in buttons in my case, so I'm not going to look too closely at those, but I do know that the buttons will be underneath and there will be some space in between the image and the buttons. So if I do that, then I'm going to first place my image so that it will be in the middle of my screen, more or less. And I'm going to give it a width of, what was it again? 420 by 200. So I'm going to say it's 420 wide, and then it has a height of 200. And because the image position is fit, it will always fit into the size that I give. No matter what image I now upload, it will always be smaller than the maximum size that I have provided. Now, to make sure that it is in the middle of my screen, I am going to set the X position of my image to the width of the screen divided by 2 minus the width of the image itself divided by 2. This is a formula that just makes sure that my image will always be positioned in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to put it a bit more or lower it a little bit more. And then for the 3 buttons, I'm going to move those to the middle as well, and with some space in between, but not too much. And then I'm going to look into each of the individual buttons. So let's go back to the toolkit and then go to the basic UI components and take a look at the button. So I'm going to start by making the first button, the register your attendance, because that for me is the most important button. I'm going to make that an accent button. And of course, by default, it's at rest. So let's take a look at the button. And if I select it, then I can copy the color code from here. So I am using Ctrl+C on my keyboard to copy that. And then going back to my button, I'm going to set the fill to that color code using a color value function. And immediately I see that, okay, so this is actually a Teams button. Or it already looks more like a Teams button simply because of the color. You would be amazed how much difference color and placement of objects, those little details really make in an application. And we will see that in the finished version after the demo as well. And then going back, of course, I have the fill when the button, when I'm hovering over the button is different. And this is where it gets a little tricky. That's it. So I'm going to copy this color code as well. And then put that in the hover fill property, color value, and then that color code. And we see that when I hover, it becomes a little bit darker, which is also the behavior that I would expect. A different color for the pressed when it's selected. So pressed fill, color value. There we go. So now when I press it, it becomes again a little bit darker. And then when it is in focus, it actually has the same fill as in at rest. Well, it depends, of course, again, on whether I'm hovering over it or whether it's pressed. But then I also have a border around it. And I can see that because of the stroke property, that's the border. Here, again, when I want to make sure that that is actually the color that I need, I can change it to red, and then I see that it becomes red. So if I then undo by using Ctrl+Z on my keyboard, then I can copy it, or I could just know, of course, as well, that this is white. Like that. So now when it is in focus, which is the most difficult to show, but you can see it, that the button is now in focus. What I also still need to do is I need to set the border radius, which I know is 4. So I can see that for all of the buttons, this is the border radius property, or the corner radius, as they call it in Figma, is 4. So that is something that I still need to do, and I'm going to do that in the property pane on the right so that I can do them all at once. And now we see that the corners are slightly rounded. We still need to take a look at the font. So for that, I am going back to Design System Type. And then I can see that I have a couple of different options, but since I am working on the web and these are not available in the studio, I'm going to use Ysewijn UI, and I believe that should already be the case. For the theme that I picked, the font is already Ysewijn UI, so that is easy. We don't need to change anything for that. And so this is what my button looks like. Something else that I have to do is actually I need to take care of the background color of my screen, because by default this is white. We see that when I just select the screen, the fill is white, but in Teams that's actually not the case. The background is actually, I believe this is in colors. Yes. So the default background is actually white. That's strange, because I always thought that it was a light gray. And if we go to the sign-in screen, we also see that here the sign-in screen is a light gray. So probably looked in the wrong place for the colors, but I'm going to select the screen to get the color code of the just the screen. And here I have to look, because there are a lot of colors. I believe it will be this one. Yes, so it's that one. You see how effective it is to change the value. So that was this one. I'm going to copy that and go back here. And then paste that in there. And again, this makes a difference compared to just white. This also makes it so that when I have a button in focus, you more clearly see that the border around it is white now compared to when the background was also white. Now we can take a look at, if you want to do this now for the other buttons, the easiest way I found to do that is to actually copy the button and then paste it for the ones underneath it. So I'm going to move those to the side and then copy paste this one twice. And then change the text to my attendances for the first one and all attendances for the second one. And then I'm going to change the on select to match these ones, which is just navigating to the right screen. Select, so I could change it. Navigate to the all attendances screen. There we go. And now I can delete these. And then what I still have to do is I need to take care of the proper placement of all of these buttons, because right now you can see that the space in between them isn't right. And for that, we take a look at the, well, we need to take into account the design system for the layout, taking into account the grid. So everything should be a multiple of 4. Since there are no specifications here about what distance the button should be, what distance should be in between the buttons and in between the button and the image, I'm going to start by simply trying a couple of things out. So the Y coordinate, which is the distance from the top of the screen, I will make that relative to the position of the image. And of course, the height of the image, because it should be below it. And then I'm going to add a multiple of 4, starting with 20, which is still a bit small if I look at the distance that I see here in between the image and whatever comes below it. So I'm going to add a couple more, let's say 32, or immediately go for 40. Yeah, so that looks like it would be a normal distance. And then for the other ones, I'm going to button. Of course, I didn't change the names now. dot height, and any in between the buttons. Does that look similar to here? I feel like it's less distance than 20 pixels here, so I'm going to go for 12. That looks more like what it would be in the...
Its first argument
Sorry to interrupt you for a second.
Yes?
Am I the only one that sees a black screen?
Oh,
I
No,
don't
for
know.
me it's okay. For me it's okay. I can see it.
Then it's me, sorry.
okay. Luckily that it wasn't for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to do the same for the next button. So then we have, that will be that one, yes. And again, 12 in between. And this now is the welcome screen of the app, which looks a lot more like a Microsoft Teams screen compared to this. It's some small changes in the placement, in the size, in the colors, of course, but it makes a huge difference when you were to actually have this in a Teams application. Now, of course, here I have made all of the buttons accent buttons. Ideally, these two would be not the accent buttons, but the standard buttons or neutral buttons, so that they would be white, because seeing the attendances is less important than actually registering a new attendance. So ideally, I would have done that. But if you do this for the entire app, because now we only have done this for the welcome screen, if we were to do this for the entire app, it will make a huge difference. And I have prepared this already. So I have a second application, attendance registration after, where I have not only worked on the placement of the controls and the colors, and you see that here the bottom two are neutral buttons, but I have also changed the wording in accordance with the guidelines of Teams. Instead of register your attendance, it says book a seat, which is more direct and more simple. It says your attendances because the application is talking to the user versus my attendances. And this is more in line with the Microsoft Teams guidelines. So if I now go to the book a seat form, you can see that this looks like a Microsoft Teams form. It's still a bit large. Ideally, this would probably be, or the font size would probably be a bit smaller. But it does look like a Microsoft Teams form, of course, with some how should I say it? Limitations in the Canvas App Studio. We don't have rounded corners on drop downs or calendar display, calendar controls, or calendar picker, date picker controls. So there are some limitations, but it does look a lot more like a Microsoft Teams form than this one does, for example. Again, it's small differences, but it does make a difference. I have also added the breadcrumb here at the top, because this is something that is typical for Microsoft Teams application. If I select cancel and I go to the your attendances screen, then I will have a list, but that is visible better with the all attendances screen. Then I have a list, which is also looks like a list that belongs in Microsoft Teams. So it's small differences, but actually they make a huge impact on what the result is of your application. Now, this is a demo application. If you want to know what that looks like with a bigger application, then I'm also going to take some time to share an open source project that I'm doing together with a friend of mine, Ysewijn, which is Provision Genie. It's an app built for Microsoft Teams to provision Microsoft Teams blended with learning. And here we have really invested in making this app look like it belongs in Microsoft Teams. Not only do we have the standard color scheme, but we are currently also working on having the app be responsive or be able to set the app also in dark mode and even high contrast. This is something that we are still working on, so it's not complete yet. but we are really investing also in making sure that the app really looks like it belongs in Microsoft Teams, no matter which theme you are using Microsoft Teams in. So if you want to take a look at that, the entire project is on GitHub. You can download it, you can play with it, you can contribute if you want to. So make sure to check that out if you're interested in how to do this for a bigger application than the one that I just showed. If I now go back to the slides for a little bit. So I've done the demo. I want to share some resources. So if you want to know more in general about designing your app with UI templates, you can find it it's a link to the Microsoft Docs page that I shared in the beginning. Of course, make sure to get the Teams UI Toolkit for yourself to play with in Figma. If you want to have some simple and clean illustrations in your app that you don't want to spend time or money on designing them yourself or hiring a designer to do that. The one that I had on the welcome screen is from Undraw. You can get illustrations there for use in your application. We also use those in Provision Genie. And the advantage is that you can give Undraw a color code, and then the accent colors in the images change to whatever your brand colors are as well. So you cannot, it's not that you can only use them for blurple images, Teams blurple images, but also for any color that you want. So that is interesting. I have a shorter form of this session on my blog where I also go through all of the basics again. All of the links are included there, so you can find that as well. And if a secret for making your applications look even better is using the HTML text control and inputting CSS into that to get amazing effects. For example, a lot of the buttons on, all of the buttons and the cards in Microsoft Teams and in Teams apps usually have a drop shadow or a box shadow around them. You cannot get that effect with any of the out-of-the-box Power Apps controls, but you can get that by adding CSS to an HTML text control. Just make sure to not use the HTML text control for any of the texts that you are displaying, just for the visual effects, because HTML text controls are not accessible by a screen reader, for example. So if you would have actual content in there, that would not be accessible for people with a visual impairment using a screen reader. So that's a tip. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, or you can reach out to me on Twitter. And if you want to learn more about Provision Genie, you can also find that on the website provisiongenie.com. So Michelle, thank you already for the feedback that I can see in the chat. And if there are any questions, I think we have about 5 minutes left to answer them.